Excuse me? Do you have any idea who my father is? The words cut through the memorial ceremony like a knife. Madison Sterling, 17 years old, stood in her designer heels and $1,000 dress, glaring at the elderly man who had accidentally bumped into her while taking his seat. The man wore a military uniform, covered in medals and ribbons, his weathered face showing decades of service. But Madison didn't care about any of that. "You just wrinkled my Valentino dress. This costs more than you probably make in a year." The crowd around them fell silent. Veterans, active service members, and military families turned to stare. This was supposed to be a solemn moment, honoring those who had given their lives for their country. Instead, a privileged teenager was causing a scene. The old soldier straightened up, his posture rigid despite his age. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at Madison with eyes that had seen things she couldn't imagine. But Madison wasn't done. "Well, aren't you going to apologize? Or are you just going to stand there like a statue?" Her mother, Catherine Sterling, rushed over, her face pale with embarrassment. Catherine was the CEO of a major tech company and usually commanded any room she entered. But right now, she looked helpless. "Madison, please, not here, not now." Madison rolled her eyes dramatically. "Mom, he literally crashed into me. And look at this dress. It's designer. He needs to pay for the dry cleaning at minimum." The general, because that's what he was, finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured, but carried an authority that made even the most hardened soldiers stand at attention. "Miss, I apologize if I bumped into you. That was not my intention." Madison scoffed. "If? There's no if about it. You totally did. And honestly, I don't know why they let just anyone into these things. This is supposed to be an exclusive event." A younger officer nearby closed his eyes, wincing. He knew something Madison didn't. Something her mother was desperately trying to prevent her from discovering the hard way. "Madison Grace Sterling." Catherine's voice cracked with a mixture of anger and fear. "Stop talking. Right now." But Madison was on a roll, her sense of entitlement flowing freely. She'd grown up with everything handed to her, never learning that money and status didn't give her the right to treat people like they were beneath her. "No, Mom. I'm tired of people thinking they can just do whatever they want, without consequences. He needs to learn to be more careful." The general remained perfectly still. Around him, other veterans were shaking their heads. Some looked angry. Others looked sad. They all knew what was coming, and none of them could stop it. Madison's father, Richard Sterling, finally appeared from wherever he'd been networking. He was a real estate mogul, used to getting his way through money and connections. But when he saw his daughter confronting the general, his face went from confident to horrified in seconds. "Madison, step back. Now." His voice had an edge of panic that Madison had never heard before. "Dad, thank goodness you're here. This old man bumped into me and won't even offer to pay for my dress to be cleaned. Can you believe it?" Richard Sterling looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. He turned to the general with genuine fear in his eyes. "General Harrison, sir, I am so deeply sorry. My daughter, she doesn't know. She didn't recognize you." Madison's face twisted in confusion. "General? So what? He still bumped into me." Catherine grabbed Madison's arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any clue who you're speaking to?" Madison yanked her arm away. "Some general. Big deal. Dad knows lots of military people." The ceremony organizer, a colonel with 20 years of service, stepped forward. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Miss Sterling, the man you just berated is General Marcus Harrison. He's a 4-star general, Medal of Honor recipient, and has served this country for 42 years. He's lost friends, soldiers under his command, and nearly his own life protecting people like you. This ceremony today, it's partially in his honor. He's retiring after more than 4 decades of service." Madison's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she looked uncertain. The colonel wasn't finished. General Harrison led the rescue mission that saved 37 American civilians from a terrorist compound in Afghanistan. He was shot twice during that mission, but refused to leave until every single civilian was safe. He's been awarded the Medal of Honor, 3 Purple Hearts, and more commendations than I can count. And you just told him he's not important enough to be at an exclusive event. The color drained from Madison's face. Around her, people were staring with undisguised disgust. Camera phones were out, recording everything. This was going to be all over social media within minutes. Richard Sterling looked like he might have a heart attack. His business relied heavily on government contracts, many of which required military connections and endorsements. Insulting a 4-star general, especially one as respected as Marcus Harrison, could destroy everything he'd built. "Sir," Richard addressed the general, his voice shaking, "please, let me make this right. My daughter is young. She's foolish. She doesn't understand." "General." Harrison held up a hand, silencing him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but everyone nearby could hear it. "Mr. Sterling, your daughter is 17. Old enough to drive, old enough to make choices, old enough to understand respect. The problem isn't that she's young. The problem is that she's been taught that money and status make her better than other people." He turned to Madison, who was now looking at the ground, unable to meet his eyes. "Young lady, I did bump into you. And for that, I apologize. But let me tell you something about that dress you're so worried about. The soldiers we're honoring today, they wore uniforms that got covered in dust, blood, and worse. They wore them in 100-degree heat and freezing cold. Some of them died in those uniforms, and not one of them complained about wrinkles." Madison felt tears starting to form. She wanted to disappear, to rewind time, to take back everything she'd said. But she couldn't. General Harrison continued, his voice never rising, but carrying the weight of decades of leadership. "I've seen young men and women, barely older than you, show more courage and selflessness in a single moment than most people show in a lifetime. I've watched 18-year-olds risk their lives to save strangers. I've held dying soldiers who used their last breaths to ask about their team, not themselves. And you're standing here at a ceremony meant to honor their sacrifice, complaining about a dress." The silence was deafening. Madison's tears were flowing freely now, her expensive makeup running down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." General Harrison's expression softened slightly, but his message wasn't finished. "Sorry is a start, but sorry doesn't mean much without change. Do you know what true privilege is, Miss Sterling? It's not money or status. It's living in a country where you're safe enough to worry about wrinkled dresses instead of bombs. It's having the freedom to attend ceremonies like this without fear. That privilege was bought with the blood and sacrifice of soldiers who will never get to worry about what dress they're wearing." Catherine Sterling was crying now too. Not from sadness, but from the crushing weight of realizing she'd raised a daughter who thought designer clothes mattered more than basic human decency. One of the veterans nearby, a woman who'd lost both legs in combat, spoke up. Her voice was steady, her gaze direct. "I used to be just like you, princess. Thought the world revolved around me. Then I joined the military and learned what real problems look like. Maybe you should consider doing the same. Might teach you some humility." Madison looked at the woman, seeing her prosthetic legs for the first time, and felt a wave of shame so intense she thought she might be sick. The general pulled out a handkerchief, old and worn, and handed it to Madison. "Dry your eyes. We have a ceremony to attend. You're welcome to stay, but I suggest you spend the time thinking about what matters in life, because I promise you, it's not designer dresses or social status." He turned to walk to his seat, and the crowd parted for him like water. The ceremony organizer motioned for everyone to take their places. The event would continue, but nothing would be the same. Madison stood frozen, the general's handkerchief clutched in her hand. Her parents flanked her, both looking devastated. Her father's phone was already buzzing with messages. Word was spreading fast. Business partners were calling. Military contacts were going silent. As the ceremony began, Madison forced herself to watch, really watch, for the first time in her life. She saw the families of fallen soldiers, saw children who would grow up without parents, saw spouses who'd lost their partners. She saw veterans in wheelchairs, veterans with missing limbs, veterans whose scars weren't visible but were no less real. The general gave a speech, his final one in uniform. He talked about honor, sacrifice, and service. He talked about the young men and women who'd served under his command, some of whom hadn't made it home. He talked about what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. Madison listened to every word, and with each sentence, she felt smaller and smaller. Not because the general was trying to diminish her, but because she was finally understanding how narrow her world had been. When the ceremony ended, people lined up to shake the general's hand, to thank him for his service, to share their own stories. Madison watched from a distance, not sure if she had the right to approach him again. But as the crowd thinned, General Harrison caught her eye and motioned her over. Madison walked slowly, feeling like she was heading to her own judgment. "Sir, she started, but he held up his hand again. "Miss Sterling, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. You made a mistake today, a big one. But you're 17. Mistakes are how we learn, if we're willing to learn from them." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "This is the contact information for a youth leadership program I help run. It's designed for young people who need to understand what service and sacrifice really mean. We work with veterans, volunteer in communities, help military families. I want you to call this number tomorrow." Madison took the card with shaking hands. "Why would you help me after what I did?" The general's weathered face showed the hint of a smile. "Because I've seen people change, Miss Sterling. I've seen selfish soldiers become selfless leaders. I've seen scared kids become heroes. You have a choice now. You can go back to your life of privilege and forget this ever happened. Or you can use this as a wake-up call. Use it to become someone worth respecting, not because of your father's money, but because of who you are." Madison nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "And, Miss Sterling, keep the handkerchief. It belonged to a young soldier who saved my life in Iraq. He didn't make it home. His name was Private James Chen. He was 19 years old and worried more about keeping his team safe than about himself. Every time you look at that handkerchief, I want you to remember that there are people in this world who give everything for others. Be one of those people." As General Harrison walked away, surrounded by grateful veterans and families, Madison stood, holding the handkerchief and the card. Her parents approached cautiously, unsure what to say. Madison looked down at the worn piece of cloth in her hand. It was simple, standard military issue, with faded initials embroidered in the corner. J.C., James Chen. A 19-year-old who died serving his country while she complained about designer dresses. "Mom, Dad," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her tears. "I need to make some changes." Her phone buzzed, social media notifications. The video of her confrontation was going viral, just as she'd feared. Comments were pouring in, most of them harsh and deserved. Her name was being dragged through every platform. Friends were unfriending her. Sponsors for her influencer account were dropping her. Everything she'd built her identity on was crumbling. And somewhere deep inside, Madison realized that was exactly what needed to happen. The next morning, Madison called the number on the card. A woman answered, her voice professional, but kind. "Youth Veterans Leadership Program. This is Sarah." "Hi, my name is Madison Sterling. General Harrison gave me this number and told me to call." There was a pause, then Sarah's voice warmed. Ah, yes. The general called this morning. He said you might reach out. He also said you showed potential for real growth. Can you start this weekend? Madison looked around her bedroom, filled with expensive clothes, designer bags, and all the trappings of her privileged life. None of it seemed important anymore. Yes, she said firmly. I can start this weekend. Good. Wear comfortable clothes. Bring work gloves. And Madison, leave the designer stuff at home. Where you're going, it won't matter. Madison smiled, really smiled, for the first time since the ceremony. I understand. Thank you. She hung up and looked at the handkerchief, now carefully placed on her desk next to a photo from the ceremony she'd found online. In the photo, General Harrison was shaking hands with a young and veteran, both of them smiling. The caption read, General Marcus Harrison, retiring after 42 years of distinguished service, a true American hero. Madison picked up the handkerchief again, running her fingers over the faded initials. James Chen. She didn't know him, would never know him, but she made a silent promise to his memory. She would be better. She would do better. She would become someone worth respecting. Her phone buzzed again. More notifications, more people condemning her actions. She took a deep breath and posted something for the first time since the incident. I made a terrible mistake. I disrespected a genuine hero because I was too selfish and ignorant to see beyond my own privilege. General Harrison showed me grace I didn't deserve. I'm going to spend the next chapter of my life learning what real service means. To everyone I offended, especially our veterans and military families, I am deeply sorry. Words aren't enough, but actions can be. Watch me prove it. She turned off her phone, not caring about the responses. She had work to do, a person to become, a debt of gratitude to pay to people like James Chen and General Harrison, who'd given everything so that spoiled teenagers could worry about wrinkled dresses. 3 months later, Madison stood in a community center, helping organize a care package drive for deployed soldiers. Her hands were dirty, her clothes were basic, and her expensive manicure was long gone. But she was smiling, genuinely happy for care, for the first time in years. General Harrison walked in, now in civilian clothes, and watched her work for a moment before approaching. Miss Sterling. Madison looked up, her face lighting up. General Harrison, I didn't know you'd be here. I help coordinate these drives. Wanted to see how you were doing. Madison gestured at the boxes around her, filled with supplies soldiers had requested. I never knew how much work went into this, how much organization, how many people cared. The general nodded approvingly. You're different than you were at that ceremony. I hope so, sir. I'm trying to be. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. You're doing more than trying, Madison. You're succeeding. Private Chen would be proud. I'm proud. As he walked away to help other volunteers, Madison felt something she'd never experienced before. Not pride from expensive purchases or social media likes, but real pride. The kind that came from knowing she was making a difference, however small. She picked up another care package to pack, smiling at the letter inside from a family thanking whoever would send supplies to their son overseas. This was what mattered. This was what being privileged really meant. Having the opportunity to help others, to serve, to be part of something bigger than yourself. The spoiled girl who'd worried about wrinkled dresses was gone. In her place stood someone who finally understood what General Marcus Harrison had tried to teach her that day. True honor isn't demanded, it's earned, one act of service at a time.